Yeah, really. But and here's also when I have a break, I'll go so I went and visited parents and family, and I had a day or two.
I've got a spare copy of that if you want, just because it can be handy to have while you've got there.
When your electronic bill is on your bank account, I've cleaned up that list. I know, strangely satisfying. So I felt like I had to call a Otway Shire rate notice.
Welcome, everyone.
Very satisfying.
Nyama, Wanjuri Kulin, Mirambika Lebik Winup Daraban, Bagangbal Awit Juri, Bagangukal Nangit, Bambuth Ba Yellingbu. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land Darebin Council stands and pay my respects to elders past and present. Welcome to tonight's meeting. Membership of the Council is as listed in the agenda, and I note that Councillors Kim Lassurf and Councillor Tim Lawrence are on an approved leave of absence. Councillors, are there any disclosures of conflict of interest tonight? Thank you. I welcome everybody to tonight's meeting, especially the community members in the gallery and those watching online. Before I begin, I would like to set out my expectations for the evening with regard to our behaviour and remind councillors of our obligations under the Code of Conduct. At Darebin, we pride ourselves on being a progressive and contemporary council. In the interests of demonstrating exemplary leadership, I have high expectations that we'll all be professional in our conduct throughout the evening and respectful in our debate. It's important for both councillors and the community to remember that our council chamber is both a workplace and a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure the working environment and public forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. I want to be clear that I will not tolerate any form of personal acrimony or insult, grandstanding or yelling, nor will I put up with talking over the top of one another, any use of unreasonable or impolite language or interjections from the gallery. We do have a lot to get through tonight, and as always, I expect you to direct any questions or comments that you have through me as the chair. I'll endeavour to make sure that everyone has an opportunity, but I will also make sure that we stick to time. That brings us to confirmation of the minutes of the previous council meeting. Councillor Williams, moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? Thank you, that is carried. Before we move into question time, I would like to read an important statement. It is with great sadness that I take a moment before we begin tonight's council business to acknowledge the horrific Easter Sunday terrorist attacks inflicted on the people of Colombo, Sri Lanka. Like communities around the world, we send our condolence and support to the people of Sri Lanka and our deepest sympathies to the families and communities directly affected, both in Colombo and around the world. The heartbreak and grief they are dealing with is something no person, no family and no community should ever have to endure. At the same time, we also stand in solidarity with those here in Darebin with close ties to Sri Lanka. Darebin is home to more than 800 people who were born in Sri Lanka, and there are many more who work and visit here daily, who also have family ties in Sri Lanka. We extend to them our support as people come to terms with this tragedy. The Darebin community is strengthened and enriched by our diversity, just as we saw people rally in solidarity around those affected by the Christchurch attacks earlier this year. We now stand in solidarity with those suffering from the Colombo attacks, and we are heartened by the responses we see in our community. In Darebin, we are a community enriched by people of many cultures and beliefs, and we stand united as a proud, strong community in welcoming all to our city. I'd like to ask that everybody stand for a minute of silence. Thank you. I will now move on to question time. I'll start with questions that were submitted online, but before I do, I would like to remind the gallery that you're required to approach the lectern and clearly state your name. If you cannot approach the lectern, an officer will come to you. I ask that you direct your questions to myself as the Mayor and that you limit your questions to 2, as this also gives other people the opportunity to ask questions. Please make your questions brief and to the point. There's no need for lengthy introduction comments to preface your questions. I'll start with those questions, as I said, received online. The first question is from Serena O'Mealy and has 2 parts. Part A. The Darebin City Council proposed budget 2019-20 at page 44 states that for Public Open Space and Recreation Reserve, budgeted movement in this reserve for 2019-20 is to increase by 2.07 million from 6.5 million at the end of 2018-19 to 8.57 million at the end of 2019-20. Where is the corresponding line in the proposed budget tables for the Open Space and Recreation Reserve, and how much money will be left in this reserve once budgeted commitments for 2019-20 are deducted? Hi Serena, thanks for your questions tonight. I can clarify that the figure of 8.57 million at the end of 2019-20 is the amount that the reserve will have left after budgeted commitments are deducted. The draft budget documents don't have a separate line for the Public Open Space and Recreation Reserve. This reserve is included as part of the reserves figure that appears in the budgeted balance sheet on page 25. The second part of that question is, when does Darebin Council intend to release a planning scheme amendment for public comment to increase the amount of funds it collects from developers under Section 18 of the Subdivision Act 1988, which are currently collected on a sliding scale of just 2 to 5%? The answer to the second part of the question is, at this stage, we are expecting to consider a report regarding funds collected under the Subdivision Act 1988 at the June 2019 meeting. We usually refer to this as the Open Space Levy. If Council does decide to change the current Open Space Levy, we would then formally request authority from the Planning Minister to change the planning scheme, and a formal public exhibition process would follow. This could be August this year, but timing would depend on the state government. Question 2, submitted by Serena O'Malley, is in 2 parts also. Part A. By 2019-20, there will be no money left in the reserve which is dedicated to the Developer Contribution Scheme after the previous Darebin Council allowed the scheme to lapse on the 30th of June 2014. The current Darebin Council has committed to renewing the DCP in its past 3 budgets. When will the new DCP planning scheme amendment be released for public comment? Part A of this question is answered as follows. Hi Serena, I can confirm that the Development Contributions Plan is a high priority for me and for Council. This project is well underway but has seen some delays to the original timelines and it will take some more time. The work is complex and officers are currently focused on detailed planning for infrastructure at local levels. At this stage, we are expecting public exhibition in around August 2019, but this is subject to state government approval, so it is possible it will change. Question 2B. I refer to Council Resolution minute number 17-175, which was passed on the 15th of May 2017, which, and I'm quoting, 3, requests officers to commence work on an infrastructure plan and development contributions policy for identified precincts and activity centres to be used as an interim measure to charge development contributions prior to the mechanisms being implemented into the Darebin planning scheme. Was this interim measure to collect development contributions ever put in place, and if so, how much money has been collected? How much will be left in the reserve once budgeted commitments for 2019-20 are deducted, and where is the corresponding line item in the Darebin City Council proposed budget 2019-20? And the answer to 2B is, we have put in place an interim approach where we seek developer contributions on a site-by-site basis for developments in activity centres. We do this by applying planning permit conditions. Funds collected using this method must be used for specific streetscape works. So far, this has been applied on several major development sites, including those at the corner of High Street and Arthurton Road, Northcote and High Street, and Raglan Street, Preston. Funds are collected at the start of the development, which can be 3 years after the planning permit is issued, and it is worth understanding that some developments don't go ahead. So far, the total value of works covered by conditions is around $300,000, but none of this has been received yet and is therefore not reflected in the 2019-20 budget. Funds will be held in a reserve, but not the same reserve as other DCP funds. Thank you, Ms O'Mealy, for those questions. I have no more questions that I've received beforehand, so I'd like to invite questions from the gallery. Are there any questions from the gallery? No? Oh, Mr Nugent, please come up to the lectern.
My name is John Nugent. Mayor Rennie, could you please advise why the Pender Park Master Plan received $300,000 in the draft budget, while the Dole-Donoff Master Plan received only $120,000. Both have referenced community groups. The Dole-Donoff Master Plan is far bigger than Pender Park. Mayor Rennie, who decides on who gets what in these master plans? Is it your officers, or is it a case of the southern part of the city getting more than the north? I've went down to Pender Park. As I said, the Dole-Donoff Master Plan is about 15 times bigger than Pender Park. I honestly don't know what could be spent down Pender Park. It has everything down there. Cover, barbecue, seats, play swings.
Thank you, Mr Nugent, for your submission, for your question, and you've entered into the domain of submission. So in response to that, this is a draft budget, and I would very much encourage you to make a submission in relation to this matter and advocate in your submission for further funding for the Dole and Donoff Reserve.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, can I ask my second question, please?
Certainly.
Mayor Rennie, could you please advise what was spent in the 18-19 budget on capital works in the northern part of the city from Dundas Street onwards, and what was spent on the capital works in the southern part of the city? Also, what will be spent on the proposed 19-20 budget in the north and south areas? Thank you.
Mr Nugent, thank you for that question. In relation to the specifics of spending in the past year, I would obviously have to take that on notice. I can assure you that a review has been undertaken of capital works proposed in the north and south, and equal amounts almost are being spent, but we make our funding decision, our budget decisions, based on the needs of projects in all areas. We don't make them on the basis of wards. Thank you. We'll get that further information to you. Are there any further questions? No, there being none. I'll also ask if there's anyone here who wants to make a submission tonight. Not at this time. No, I think Mr Turner's not here. Oh, Mr Turner, you are here. Would you like to make a submission before the item in question, or would you like to make it now? Okay, thank you, Mr Turner. We'll note that and get back to you. So that brings us to item 6 on the agenda, petitions. There are none. Urgent business. There is none. So we are now in item 8, consideration of reports. Item 8.1.
I'm happy to move 8.1, Mayor Rennie.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. And moved, seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm really pleased to move this item. It's in relation to the Preston Mosque and Darebin City Council re-establishing their relationship via a memorandum of understanding. It's a memorandum of understanding that go from 218 to 222. We've already had a memorandum of understanding with the mosque since 2009, and our relationship goes back to 2003 with the mosque, and that relationship was established particularly after the September 11th terrorist attack in New York, and where there was a lot of impact in regards to the Muslim community here in the city of Darebin. The memorandum of understanding that we've had has worked really well with council in terms of establishing clear lines of communication between council and people at the mosque. And it should be pointed out that the Preston Mosque is a significant mosque. It is the biggest mosque in Australia, and it's where the Islamic Council of Victoria actually meets. So it has quite a significant place in the Muslim community in Australia. The previous MOU focused and concentrated a lot on parking type issues and traffic management issues, and particularly around the Friday prayer days, and also when there were activities that were held at the mosque in order to help with the traffic issues that are obviously associated with when you get a lot of people converging into the one area. Since then, and in relation to this new memorandum of understanding, we've actually gone beyond that, and this memorandum of understanding goes towards, if you like, deepening the relationship between the mosque and the city of Darebin, and so the relationship goes towards about how council can work together with people at the mosque in terms of improving and assisting the neighbourhood around the mosque. Also in terms of activities around interfaith tours and interfaith dialogue in our community, and particularly after your words at the beginning of the meeting where we've seen another terrorist attack in Colombo. It's quite important that this type of work and these types of relationships are nurtured and reinforced between council as a local tier of government and a religious community. But the number one feature in the mosque, and I'll end on this, is that in relation to the MOU, is that the MOU has an action plan attached to it. This is a new feature of the MOU, and that action plan outlines the various activities and programs and new relationships that are going to be established in the course of the life of the MOU. So I'm really happy to see that this is coming to council after a lot of consultation and a lot of work by officers, and I thank officers for their patience and engagement in developing this new document.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
Yes, thank you. The mosque is not only our biggest, but it's also one of the oldest. It rates back to 1970 or 71, where people to this day flock there, especially at festival times and periods such as Ramadan. Now, the MOU is a special binding sort of contract between council and the mosque, and what this actually does, it has a mutual respect between the communities of harmony and working of solutions together with where both organisations can actually go forward, working towards issues regarding community cohesion, harmony and diversity, addressing the needs of the wider community, engagement processes and other legal binding things that we need to encourage and do more in that area regarding parking, where we seem to have a lot of issues being such a small street there. We also look at the mutual respect between what we can do in partnerships, and also when we have issues, when we have terrorist attacks, that we can work towards on how we can work together on the best way forward in how we can have a better outcome for all in the community, so we can do more in that area. So the MOU is not it is a legal binding, but it's more of a communication between two parties on how we can go further and forward in the community as a whole in Darebin.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? There being no further speakers, I would like to exercise my discretion to say a few words, and particularly note that the MOU that Darebin Council had developed with the mosque was particularly useful in the days after the Christchurch bombings, when we know that our community didn't feel safe here. It enabled us immediately to be in contact with the mosque and to establish a positive response, which was very much appreciated by members of the mosque and the Muslim community more broadly. So I really commend the MOU to everybody. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Yes, thank you. Councillor Greco will note that that was a unanimous decision. Item 8.2 on the agenda, the Fairfield Rail Spur.
Mayor Rennie, I'd like to move that with some amendments which I provided to officers and councillors in advance of the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor McCarthy's proposed motion is on the screen. Is there a seconder for that, please? Councillor Amir. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Amir. I'd like to actually start off also by thanking the Friends of the Fairfield Spur, who are a community group that have formed recently after a lot of informal lobbying by the local community in relation to this site, going back, in fact, as far as 2010, when plans were first put on the table for the Chandler Highway Bridge duplication and, of course, the Alphington Paper Mill site. And at the time, council was approached by local residents to ask if there is going to be further development in this area, if there are going to be 4,000 or 5,000 people living in Alphington, south of Heidelberg Road, how will they get to the Fairfield shops? Will they walk or will they drive? And the natural corridor that everyone saw was, of course, the Fairfield Spur, which is the remaining part of the outer circle line that once existed over 100 years ago, that is not actually a formalised path, but in fact for over 100 years has been an informal path until relatively recently, and open and accessible to the community. The motion we have before us and the report we have before us, and thank you to our officers for their quick action on this, responds to the likelihood that the landowner, being the state government, will consider offering this land through its public purchase process once it's been considered by both other departments and council. Darebin Council has always held the view, going back a number of years, and publicly has had that view supported by local politicians, that this land should remain in public hands and should be retained, obviously, for a linear path, a constructed path, and possible recreation opportunities along that corridor. The motion we have before us, councillors, takes that position a step further, formalises our advocacy to both the state government and relevant agencies, and of course picks up on some of the themes that the community has raised with us as well in terms of what they would like to see. Our community does not wish to see this land sold off to developers, but rather wishes to see this land continue to serve a public purpose as it has for over 100 years. In fact, at a recent meeting which Rucker Ward councillors attended with local community members, we were reminded that this piece of state government land has not only been used for over 100 years, but in fact has been maintained and mowed for over 100 years, 103 years to be exact. The community has every expectation that this land will continue to serve a public purpose, and our advocacy tonight, our motion here, sets out our proposal, which is that this land could have a continuous linear path from Railway Place, connecting Railway Place all the way through to Heidelberg Road for those 5,000 residents south of Heidelberg Road to be able to make their way to Fairfield Village, including the option of a skate park or skate facilities and a half-court basketball. This is state government land. We need the state government to take a position commensurate with community opinion, and that's what we've set out here this evening.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
Here in Darebin, we talk a lot and hear a lot about the need for green open space. There's a lot of concrete in Darebin, and I hear a lot from residents about how important it is that they have access to parks and green space, not just in the formal sense, but also just being able to look around and see the sun, see the horizon, and not feel too boxed in. So in regards to the Fairfield Spur, it's absolutely crucial that this space is retained as open space, as space that can continue to be used by the community. Hopefully, with these recommendations, look at improving the site so that it can be used more formally as a walking path, cycling path, giving people more access to recreation areas. Fairfield is an area, like much of Darebin, that is becoming more and more populated, and so the need for these facilities is only going to become more and more important. The demand for cycling infrastructure is only going to become more and more important, and this is an important linkage between Railway Place and Heidelberg Road. So I'm very much commend Councillor McCarthy for his motion. I know he's been involved with the local groups in the area for a really long time, and it sounds like there's a lot of passion and commitment from the community to retaining this space. And I hope we'll have some positive response from the state government in keeping this land and making it even better and more useful for the community.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Williams.
I'd just like to ask a question about what the size of that land is, because I didn't see anywhere in the report the actual size of it. I know it's quite large from looking at the site, but it doesn't actually give
Thank you,
size.
Councillor Williams. I'll ask if Ms Olivier is able to answer that question.
Certainly, I've got it at 1.44 hectares.
Wow, okay.
Thank you. Are there further speakers, councillors? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those... Oh, yes?
Go on.
Councillor Greco.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Look, yeah, I would just like to propose a very small amendment, and hopefully it'll be acceptable to the mover and the seconder. And it's in relation to point C, where it talks about provides, rather than having the word provides, maximises public or social housing at accessible locations on the site.
No, that's not acceptable. So would you like to debate that amendment?
So it's not acceptable?
No, it hasn't been
Okay.
accepted by the seconder, so...
Look, I'll move it so that therefore I'll explain
Sure.
the rationale behind it, and hopefully...
Okay, so before you do that, I'll just need to get a seconder for that amendment. So Councillor Williams is second to...
Okay, just
seconding
very
that
briefly,
amendment.
when I was looking at this, and look, and I'm really happy that Councillor McCarthy has slightly altered the recommendation that was here before us to acknowledge the history of the site and things like that. But given the size of the site and given that it is public land, a way of sort of ensuring that it does remain public land is that we advocate to the state government that we try to maximise the amount of public housing or social housing on the site. I just refer councillors to page 19 of the report, where it talks about any future residential use should maximise provision of affordable housing, including social housing. I mean, I think our officers have recognised that this could be an area, and I'm not talking about obviously the whole area, but as much as possible, taking into account all the other uses of this particular strip of land, that where we encourage as much as possible and try to maximise the outcome in terms of having social and public housing on this public land. Look, I don't really need to say why that's important. I mean, we as a council have a commitment to improving and increasing the stock of public housing and social housing in our municipality. We're actually trying to do this with our own land, where we've got a project where we're considering using our own land here at the back of the council and allocating that towards social and public housing. As we're doing that, I think we should take every opportunity that we have to push the state government, which has been dragging its feet, as we know, and the federal government to increase the stock of public housing and social housing. And I think that we are leading by example by us providing our own land in relation to this sort of thing. So it puts us in good stead to actually advocate that with the state government. So we're not sort of just talking hot air, but we could actually put a fairly strong case to say not only maintain this land for public use, not only ensure that this land is enjoyed by the local residents, but as much as possible, and as Councillor McCarthy has said, in where the accessible locations on the site to maximise the public and social housing in that particular end of our city.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
Nothing further more to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers to this amendment?
I'll speak against it, Mayor. Look, I appreciate where Councillor Greco is coming from in relation to this. However, I think that the word that he's proposed to include there potentially confuses the issues here. There are two key locations which I know would generate strong community support. In fact, they've already identified them themselves. There would be great locations for some public or community housing, which of course are the interfaces, the accessible interfaces at both Tuckett Street and Perry Street, and of course even potentially at the Heidelberg Road end. These are sites which actually have access to the road. They are sites which would provide great passive surveillance for the Fairfield Spur line, and there's of course opportunities to provide that. We already have some great community housing for vulnerable older people around the corner near St Anthony's. There is a model that works well in this precinct, in this location, that doesn't overwhelm the space, but we need to remember that the community's advocacy on this issue is actually about continuing to have a linear shared path with some green space along the side, and to create the opportunity to open that up at key locations for some housing. My concern with Councillor Greco's word there is that I think it potentially runs counter to other parts of the motion, because what no one is arguing for, and I don't think Councillor Greco is arguing this, and I certainly wouldn't support it, is to fill the entire site with housing. The key thing here is to move away from the broad reference of affordable housing, and actually to specify both public and community housing options in those key locations. And critical to that is point 3, which is actually to retain this site as public land, for not to be handed over to the private development market. So that's where we are with this proposal. That's why, unfortunately, I can't accept Councillor Greco's proposal as appropriate as it is to talk about the need to increase public and social housing provision in the south of our city. I think it runs the risk of countering some of the other calls for action on this front. I'd also note that the petition online supporting this position is now at 700 local residents and is literally growing by the minute. So there's a lot of community support. I think we've got the
That's
word
time.
right. I can't support the amendment.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Amir.
I'll also be speaking against the motion in its current form, but would like to foreshadow
The amendment, sorry.
the amendment, sorry. I support the motion. Speak against the amendment in its current form, but will foreshadow a future amendment with different wording. The reason is, as was mentioned by Councillor McCarthy, the focus here is on the maintenance of public open space, of recreation space, of the active transport corridor, green open space, and I would not want to put anything in the motion that might lead the state government to believe that we want, that we would want to see too much building on this site. In fact, I would go so far to say that we would not want any residential development on this site, private residential development on this site, because we want it to be retained in public hands. So for that reason, I won't be voting for this amendment, but will foreshadow a future amendment if this one fails.
Councillor Amir, I'll just highlight that as the seconder of the motion, you are not able to propose an amendment. Are there further speakers to the amendment? I'll put that to the vote. So we're voting on the amendment. All those in favour? And against? That motion is lost.
Can I put up an amendment also?
Yes, so we'll just revert to the original motion. So we'll go back to provides. And Councillor Williams, what's the amendment you would like to propose?
Just in front of public, also on 3, number C, just to say affordable public, and one other little word, and or social housing.
Can I clarify whether you wish to include a comma after affordable, so provides affordable, comma, public or social housing, or did you want it to read provides affordable public or social housing, because they actually mean slightly different things?
affordable public, then comma, and or social housing.
So, do you want a comma after affordable? Public housing by its nature is affordable, so we're talking about...
Yes.
So this would be... okay. Is that acceptable to the mover? No? No. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Greco, thank you. Councillor Williams, you may speak to the amendment.
I do respect with what my fellow councillor is saying regarding, and the seconder regarding not having a lot of housing that they want built in that area, considering they would like it to keep it as open space as possible. But we are talking at 1.44 hectares. That's a hell of a lot of land. And we're talking in a corridor area that holds great connections to main roads and transport. I can't see why we can have a combination of both having open space and obviously affordable public and social housing. Even if it's a combination of both, it doesn't have to be a 1.44 hectares built of public and social housing. I just think this would be an ideal place where some type of housing would be quite easily accessible for those that that need housing, and also that be able to get transport location quite easily and accessible.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Messina, it's been seconded by Councillor Greco, so I'm going to go to Councillor Greco unless there's a reason not to.
I have a question.
Okay, what's your question?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I'd like the officers to explain for the purpose of item C, affordable public and social housing, because there is a difference, and I'd like the chamber and members of the audience to understand the difference, please.
Thank you for that question. I'll ask Ms Olivier to respond to the question.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So public housing is owned and managed by government, usually the state government in Victoria. Social housing is an umbrella term that includes public housing, but it also includes housing managed by a registered housing organisation. And then affordable housing picks up an even broader range of subsidised and lower cost housing, but sometimes for I guess a progressively higher income group as you move forward.
Thank you, Ms Olivier. I'll return to Councillor Greco, who was the seconder of this proposed amendment.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'll just focus on just the affordable housing side of things, and just to sort of reiterate from a slightly different perspective, is that again, given the size of the land that's in question, and given that the motion already talks about public and social housing, and I think the key word in that point is that at accessible locations on the site. So it's not saying that right across the site. I think Councillor McCarthy has been right in putting those words there in order to identify the accessible areas of that site where it lends itself to affordable and public and social housing. Look, why I think we need to really think about this is that it's a really well-located site, as it's mentioned here in the report. It's a site which is near transport areas. It's a site that actually can absorb some additional housing, and also it's a site that even the state planning policy encourages the provision of housing. Now, what I would not like to see is where the state government envisages private housing on this particular site. So I think we need to encourage social, affordable and public housing on the site. Also, as the report points out, is at the moment is the back of the streets butt up to the strip of land there, and by having some housing strategically placed. It will actually improve the safety of the area and
10 seconds.
and also improve the, in terms of passive surveillance. So I really ask councillors to really consider this, and so that we can increase the stock of public, social and affordable housing in our city.
That's time, thank you. I would like to just clarify that affordable housing can and often is private housing. Are there further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So I want to speak against the motion, and it's specifically...
The amendment.
Sorry, I want to speak against the amendment, and it's specifically because point 3 reads, advocates to the state government to retain the Fairfield Rail Spur site as public land. So if we changed 3C to provide affordable housing at accessible locations on the site, that would imply that that can be private. So for me, that would make it inconsistent.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Look, I'm just obliged, I think, just to bring some hard facts to the chamber, which is that just along similar lines, but a slightly different point to Councillor Newton, if we start confusing the issue by throwing in the term affordable housing, we run the risk of sending a message not only to the state government but also to the community that we think there should be some transfer of this land to the private sector, because of course a lot of affordable housing developments are not in the community and public sense in the way that Councillors Greco and Julie Williams, Councillor Julie Williams have also advocated, but in fact are 15% below market value. So they are a subsidised form of private housing. Very valid within the market in terms of access for people, but the policy point here is quite clear. This is public land. There is no need for it to be transferred into private hands. It is a great location for some community on public housing. It's been clearly identified in the motion that is the proposal, and it has been clearly identified that the land should be retained in public hands, in government hands. And ideally, with the Linear Park as council as the land manager, I would love to see the opportunity for people to do the passive surveillance that Councillor Greco referred to. But adding in the term affordable housing, I simply can't accept, because I think it confuses the issue, starts referring to the 15% below market value housing that actually sits in private hands. And we run the risk of actually diluting the strength of the argument here, which is actually that this is public land. It has been for over 100 years, and it should be retained as such. It is a great opportunity to create an opportunity for housing at those particular accessible points. But I think the community has got it right in terms of advocating for this approach, rather than simply handing it over to private developers, which is where we would go if this amendment was successful.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers? No. No, you don't, not on an amendment. So I'll put... we'll deal with this one first, okay. I'll put this amendment to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. Councillor Messina.
Mayor, I have an amendment to item number C, to read that any residential use should exclusively be used for public or social housing. That any residential use.
That's the original motion.
Can I just check, is this instead of the existing C? It sounds terribly similar to the existing C. I'm just trying to work out, is it instead of C, or is it to add a D?
Exclusively, no, it's exclusively.
So
That any residential use should exclusively use for public or social housing. I don't think it's the original motion.
that any residential use should exclusively be
For public or social housing.
So provides that any residential use should be exclusively used for public or social housing. So provides that any residential use should be exclusively used for public or social housing. Does that sound right, Councillor Messina? Is that acceptable? No. Okay, we'll just make sure we've got the words right then. So, provides that any residential use should be exclusively for public or social housing. That's accepted by the seconder. Is it accepted by the mover?
Yes, although I think you just need to tidy up the wording.
Okay, so
Sorry.
provides that any residential use should be exclusively for public or social housing in accessible locations. Okay, that's been accepted by the mover and seconder, so that is now the motion in front of us. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. Are there further speakers on this substantive motion? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 8.3 on the agenda, Solar Savers Special Charge.
Mayor, I'd like to move that motion.
That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. It's with great pleasure that we once again proceed with the process of declaring a special charge in relation to the Solar Savers scheme. And in this incarnation, we are looking at a whopping 232 households that have signed up to be part of Solar Savers. This is part of a current council commitment of 500 houses in this current program, which is part of a much larger commitment of 4,000 households. And I just wanted to share with councillors why this is important, because this Solar Savers, expanded Solar Savers program is part of one of our key planks of our climate emergency response. In relation to the current program, we are looking at not only obviously the 232 households this evening as part of a 500 household package, but of course this is part of the 4,000 program. This will see an extra 2,800 kilowatts of solar energy, renewable energy generated in the city of Darebin. We are on track. In fact, we are now ahead of target to double the amount of renewable energy produced here in the city of Darebin as part of this commitment. And in this case, this will have a direct impact, effectively removing 7,000 tonnes of greenhouse gases from the local power generation. To put that in practical terms, councillors, that is equivalent to taking 1,500 cars off the road. 1,500 cars off the road simply by the current package, of which this tonight comprises about half of that. When we stood up in this chamber on the 5th of December 2016 and said we would be the first council in the world to declare a climate emergency, we also said we needed to follow that up with practical action. That's why in our council plan we committed to doubling the amount of renewable energy in the city of Darebin, and of course committing to 4,000 solar installations in this city over that period. It makes our Solar Savers program the largest rollout of renewable energy by any council at the domestic level in the country. So it is a significant step forward tonight, and I just want to congratulate all those households that have signed up already or of course are going to become Solar Savers households through the process that we're embarking on this evening. I'd also just note that as part of the Solar Savers program, we are delivering a direct benefit not only to those people that can afford to sign on, but also those people who otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to access solar. And this is important because we have now proven through the first Solar Savers program that when people have solar on their roof and they have reduced their energy bills, such as our pensioners and our low-income households, they are much more comfortable at turning on the air conditioner during heat waves. And that keeps them safe, it keeps people alive, and of course it means that as a community we are not only looking at our carbon emissions and our greenhouse gas emissions, but we're also looking out for human health, which is an absolutely critical part of this equation. So thank you to the officers, thank you to the community and households that have signed on, and let's get those panels on the roofs.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
It's great to see this coming to us in the council chambers. We've had a few of these reports and put forward around the Solar Savers program. We're now up to round 2. There's been over 900 households that have participated so far. So adding in this 232 households, we'll be hitting the 4-figure mark, over 1,000 households, which is very exciting. And I am really proud that we did set this goal to double solar power in Darebin and are on track to do so. So we're adding in over 1,300 kilowatts of solar power to Darebin, and this started off as a program for people in the low income brackets, and we continue to prioritise low income residents, pensioners and residents with low English, because often these groups, people are less able to access solar panels because of the upfront cost and other challenges. So I'm glad that we'll be able to they now have this opportunity, not just in terms of carbon reduction, but also reducing the cost of electricity, which is a very big challenge for many people in terms of financial security. So here it's a big commitment. We've got about $1.5 million worth of solar panels that we'll be installing in this round. But it's great to see that with the state government Solar Homes Victoria program, we'll be getting about $800,000 rebate through that program back. So that's $800,000 we'll be getting back a bit quicker. So then we can then go on and use that for other purposes here in the city of Darebin. So there was some talk when that was first introduced that it might be seen as competition with Darebin, and I'm really glad that that is not the case at all, and instead it's making it even easier than ever before for Darebin residents to be able to access solar power and all the benefits that come with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 8.4. The CEO had something to say.
Through you, Mayor, I'd like to withdraw this item. There's an administrative error in the report, which is substantial, so I'd like to withdraw the item and relist it for the next council meeting, please.
Thank you. Do we need a motion to that effect? No, it's been withdrawn, so we'll move straight to item 8.5. Mr Turner, please come up to the lectern. You have a submission on this matter.
My name's Alan Turner from Hague Street Reservoir, and also the Vice President of the Preston Bullants Amateur Football Club. First of all, I'd like to thank the Council Officer Alistair Breach, who worked with me through the process, and glad to see that a common sense approval to this monument to acknowledge William Rusty Ruthen, VC winner. Rusty was in the First World War. He was a soldier and awarded the VC Cross during actions in the 19th of May 2018 in France for most conspicuous bravery and initiative in action. He also was in our Second World War. Rusty served in the 3rd Australian Garrison, retiring as a major in 1944. Rusty was also a Collingwood City Councillor and was elected Mayor in 1945. He was also the Victorian MLA for Preston and later Reservoir from 1945 to 1961. Rusty was a local member of State Parliament serving Preston. Whilst working with the Darebin RSL for this monument, Idea into Action, by the way, I didn't know that WR Rusty Ruthen was until speaking with the Darebin RSL. It was amazing, and a number of people I spoke to had no idea who WR Rusty Ruthen was, and that the WR Ruthen Reserve and Ruthen Train Station and the Ruthen Primary School were named after him. This monument educates our citizens and educates them on our past. Thank you to Darebin Council for approving this very important part of our history. I'd also like to talk about the WR Ruthen Reserve Preston and a new electronic scoreboard that I've just been recently able to raise some funds for.
Mr Turner, that item, the scoreboard, is not on the agenda for tonight, so thank you very much for making your submission in relation to the memorial monument, and that is on the agenda tonight, and we're about to debate that.
Okay, so I'd just like to say thank you very much for your assistance in getting that done, and I'll quickly move a motion that you'll give yourself a pat on the back. Thank you.
We'll vote for that. Thank you. So, councillors will move. Happy to move. So I've got Councillor Messina and Councillor Williams. Councillor Messina, please speak to this, and seconded by Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr Turner, for your submission. I would like to acknowledge the officers and Mr Turner's strong advocacy for this memorial. We've just had Anzac Day, and often on Anzac Day I reflect on what it would be like to be a soldier. And let's not forget about Rusty Ruthen's achievement. The Victoria Cross isn't given very lightly. There's only 100 people that have been awarded the Victoria Cross. And when I did my research and I looked at what wars that are reflected on, we looked at the Boer War, World War I, World War II, the North Russian War, Vietnam and Afghanistan. We had 1.4 million soldiers that marched and went to war during those wars. Only 100 medals were awarded. So that's the importance of Rusty Ruthen's acknowledgement or actual contribution to our war efforts. And I wanted to read something out that I wrote on my Facebook page on Anzac Day, and I do every Anzac Day because I think it's really irrelevant. Although Rusty Ruthen was 22 when he went to war. Imagine being 19 years of age in a foreign country, standing in a ditch, surrounded by cold weather, your fellow soldiers, your bodies quivering from hunger, thirst, cold, and gunfire in the background. Our moment's silence is to hear those heartbeats, to listen to their souls, pay respect to their ultimate sacrifice. Can you imagine for a serious moment what would it be like? It's inconceivable and illogical for some members of society to imagine such a world. We complain about not having the latest mobile phone, iPad or sneakers. We have nothing to complain about. We cannot imagine or change history. We cannot change history, but we can learn from it and we can take a moment and think what is important. And the average age of somebody that went to Anzac was 19, Gallipoli was 19 years of age. So I always say that, and it comes into relevance because that moment's silence when I stand and go to the RSL or go to the MCG and acknowledge not only heroes such as Rusty Ruthen, I think it brings us down to earth and makes today seem joyous compared to the lives that have been lost during all the wars together. So I'm happy to recommend the officer's recommendation for option 2.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Williams.
It's with great pleasure that Council has going ahead with this memorial. I think it's really important that this plaque is erected, and it's been ongoing for several years. We're talking about a soldier who is also a state Labor politician who has received the Victorian Cross for his efforts in the face of the enemy in World War I. He was born in Collingwood. He was a mechanic in the timber industry, and he enlisted in 1915. His outstanding acts of bravery, including he held up heavy machinery gunfire, he had disregarded his own safety, and he ran towards, bad eyesight. He ran towards a machine gun and he bombed it. He captured the gun. He also encountered enemy in the shelter. He wounded and captured 6 men. And then on top of that, he continued to capture another 28. I think that's a fair amount. He has spent his day under fire. He also, during that time, he encouraged the other men that was enlisted with him. Truly bravery. This is something I only see my son do playing Fortnite. It's something people you don't consider doing in real life even to this day. This is a gentleman that has fought through World War I in Gallipoli, the Western Front, and he's also fought in World War II. On top of that, when he returned back in World War I, he ended up going into politics. So he's a man that's gone from one extreme, working down at Collingwood in the industry of hard yakka, mechanical, right through to then wanting to be a voice to make his community a better place. And it's just lovely that we're talking 48 years later that we're still acknowledging him. And I think this is a beautiful way that we can continue doing that.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'd just like to propose a small amendment, just an additional point. And it reads like this, that the Council thanks the Darebin RSL for their initiative in proposing and supporting a memorial to William Ruthen VC, Victoria Cross. So it's just an extra point to thank the Darebin RSL for their initiative.
Is that acceptable to the mover and to the seconder? Yes. Thank you for that, Councillor Greco. That becomes the motion in front of us. Are there any other speakers? No? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you particularly to Mr Turner for coming along tonight and for your long-standing advocacy on this issue. I think it would be fair to say that without you, this wouldn't have happened. So we really admire and thank you for your engagement. With regards to the other things in your submission that you didn't have time to say tonight, I will make sure that they're distributed to all councillors. Thank you. That brings us to item 8.6 on the agenda, appointment of Darebin Women's Advisory Committee. Moved by Councillor Messina and seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor Messina.
To you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation and put in an insert for item number 1 and put in the following names: Bianca Johnson, Emmett Demicherici, Fiona Long, Mishbah Wolf, Ruth Buckmaster, Shelley Dunk, Judeline Wadawangi, Leanne Miller, Tabitha Harding and Rachel Brisbane to be endorsed as the 10 community members on the Darebin Women's Advisory Committee, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your names, sorry. These applicants have been selected through a process of an expression of interest. I also want to note there's one application from an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community. 6 out of the 10 members selected are new committee members, and I want to acknowledge Councillor Kim Lesurf's chair and previous chair of Ray Kingsbury. I want to say a few things, and I think it's important that the Darebin Women's Community, basically it's a current advisory committee that works tirelessly for gender equality in our community. And I'd like to acknowledge the outstanding commitment and contribution from our officers, in particular Tanil Summers. And I want to acknowledge the work undertaken by prior chairs as I have. But I want to share a riddle, and the riddle is basically this. A father and son, and some of you may have heard of it, a father and son were involved in a car accident, and the father dies and the son's rushed away to hospital. And the surgeon says, I can't operate on him, he is my son. Now, when you first hear that riddle, you automatically assume a couple of things. The first thing, the assumption you make is that the father has been cloned or the father was a priest. Only 86% of people who have been told that riddle would acknowledge that the surgeon was a woman. Do you know that some of the answers in the riddle focused on the fact that the father was a priest? This is because the my model generalisation, when we think about people in leadership positions, is that they were males. I grew up in a world where women in leadership didn't exist, where I questioned my own sexuality because I wanted to be a leader. I wanted to talk about politics. I wanted to talk about male-dominated sports. I was a student of maths and science. It was taboo in the 80s, and I must have been a male, was running through my head, and we were at a turning point of gender inequality landscape. The old generalisation stereotype, my model of female in leadership role is evolving. The glass ceiling still exists. Unconscious bias exists, the negative stereotype that women aren't as intelligent as men, that we are way too emotional and too soft. The stereotype of women in leaders in the other end of the spectrum, oh, goodness me, is that we are too pushy and too aggressive. I guess what I wanted to say is that I strongly want to talk about...
That's time, Councillor Messina. I'm sorry.
Can I ask the question?
I had so much to say. I know. Councillor Williams has a question before we go to Councillor Amir as the seconder.
My question is, as yourself and myself have been on this advisory committee going back, 6-7 years ago, and I wanted to ask I know we only have an amount for 10 members and we have 11 applicants. Is it possible to change it that we allow the 11th? Because as you probably know over the years that sometimes people can't make it.
Councillor Williams, I'll stop there. You don't need to explain. There is a question and I'll put that question to Ms Henderson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, my understanding is that the custom has been that it's been 10 community members, but the terms of reference do read up to 12 community members.
Thank
Can
you.
that be changed in this evening's meeting to allow for the 11th? So we
Can I just remind councillors that officers undertook a clear assessment and there may be, you know, the criteria. If the mover and seconder were so inclined, no, sorry, I'll start again. We have a motion in front of us. The motion in front of us is on the screen. If someone were to propose an amendment, it could be proposed and the mover and seconder would have an opportunity to either accept or reject that.
Then I propose an amendment to change the wording from 10 to 11.
And then you would provide the name of the 11th person.
I have to go through all the names again.
Can I just...
I don't
refer-
accept that, only based on the fact that the other person is not a resident of Darebin.
Okay. So that hasn't been accepted.
But the point was if you work, live or play in Darebin, you don't have to not...
Okay, no, we're not going to debate it now. We'll have an opportunity to debate it. You've put up an amendment. The amendment has not been accepted by the mover, so no, Councillor Messina. I'll ask Councillor Williams has put up an amendment. The amendment would see the inclusion of the 11th name from the list. We have that in front of us. Is there a seconder for the amendment that Councillor Williams has proposed?
Can we see the amendment? Like what?
Councillor Greco. Ms Henderson, could we have the name of the next person? So, Councillor Greco, it would simply add the name of the 11th person.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, the name is Farzana Degan, and so the first name is spelled Farzaneh, and the surname is Dehghan.
So that's the amendment.
Sorry, through you, Mayor, it's Dehghan in for.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Henderson. That amendment has been proposed by Councillor Williams. Is there a seconder?
For the sake of the debate, I'm happy to second the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williams, I might just remind councillors in this debate that we're talking about people in the community and to be respectful of the assessment process, but also of the privacy of those members of the community who applied to be on this committee. Councillor Williams.
I guess there's a number of factors. We're only talking about one more extra person. I can't see why we can't include that one person, considering we're talking a committee that fluctuates between whether they can or can't turn up to a meeting. It's a committee that I have been on for several years. It's only until recently that I haven't been on it. We're talking a member who obviously comes from a diverse background, and I think that she would bring, I guess, a different perspective to the way she sees things, and I can't see why that she should not be included. Being part of this committee is not because that you live in Darebin. It's about people who work, play and live in Darebin, and I think we need to look at people being inclusive to all and not just being exclusive because you live in the area.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, look, I just looking at the report and looking at the, I'm just not sure how far to go in terms of making reference to the confidential report, but just in principle, from what I've heard, I think I'm supportive of the amendment. mainly for the reason that, that from my understanding, 12 members are allowed, and also just looking at the CVs of the various candidates, is that we have a slight underrepresentation of people from a non-English speaking background, and I think that including this person, and I was just trying to quickly look at her CV, is that I think it would make a good additional value to the committee and to its working. I suppose I'm able to say this because I know this person, right? In the sense, as a councillor, not in a personal capacity, because I know this person because this person is also a member of the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council. So her link is with the Darebin Council. And I only mention that not because of what I've read in the report, because of my direct experience with this person, because I am the councillor that sits on the Darebin Ethnic Community Council as the council representative. I've seen her, and also not only does she sit on the Darebin Ethnic Community Council, but if I'm not mistaken, she also sits on the Welcoming Cities reference group, if I'm not mistaken. Because sometimes I get confused with foreign names, believe it or not. But yeah, so I think in that sense she'll be a good added addition to the committee, and hopefully councillors will be able to support that.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there further speakers? Okay, there being no further speakers, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is carried, that amendment. So that amendment is now the motion before us. So we've only heard from the mover at this point in time. We'll ask Councillor Amir to speak.
It's great to see such strong interest in women from around the area being wanting to be involved in this committee, and particularly it was really great to see the diversity of the women who have put their hand up to be considered and will now be joining the committee. So we've got here a group of women that include women from lots of different cultural backgrounds, women who are Aboriginal, who are queer, and have a real breadth of expertise through their professional work, volunteering, and experience in the community. There's also really strong community connections with the breadth of organisations and groups they're involved with in Darebin, living in different parts of Darebin, and in some cases for many years. So the committee advises on issues and barriers to equality affecting women in Darebin by providing a gender lens to everything that we do. And I'm really proud of the work we've done in the gender equality space here in Darebin, even the composition of the council itself being 6 out of 9 councillors are women, which is, I think, if not the highest, certainly one of the highest ratios in Victoria. And I would really keen to see what this group will be doing and coming up with. I understand there's going to be an increasing focus on diversity and intersectional issues, and I think that's something where we can continue to... We've done a lot of good work and continue to do good work into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.7, council daytime meetings. Councillor Williams, thank you for moving that. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Williams.
It's actually great that we're doing things a little bit different here in Darebin, and one of the things that we're looking at is having a daytime council meeting. What this actually enables, not only for us but the community from all different diversity and backgrounds that can actually attend, including students that can attend during the day and actually see the workings of how a council meeting runs. They can also ask questions during question times and be part of the gallery. But not only students, but anybody who's unable to come in an evening due to family or other family commitments that they're unable to attend, that this might be a fantastic opportunity for them to come during the daytime. So it actually supports the community at all different levels, and to maximise as that area that we can get as many people in our community to attend our meetings, whether it be day or evening. Maybe we should do one on a Friday night. On that note, I don't think I have anything else further to say, but this was initiative from yourself, Councillor Susan Rennie, and I think it's important that that we do have that engagement and try and show that we are accountable and as transparent as possible here in Darebin.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'd also like to acknowledge your initiative in putting this forward some time ago now. It's great to see this now underway, and I would just recognise that that not only is this initiative going to see council meetings being made accessible to local students, but that we've also found a way in this project to make our own Young Citizens jury members active and participating in both the project design and the pre and post session or meetings, workshops. And that's fantastic to see, because we are not the only council that's doing this. We are one of a number of councils that are doing this, where we are remunerating young members of our community to actually lead, facilitate and engage other young people. And that is exactly how it should be. We are providing that platform for those young people who are absolutely dynamite, and if you haven't seen them in action, get along. They are able to do the work that I think council knows needs to happen, which is to create that student voice, to provide that platform for young people and themselves to develop those absolutely foundational skills in terms of leading in the community. And I'm sure that we'll see some of those young people either in this chamber or in one of the other chambers of government very soon in the future. And I really hope that we see that day, because there is a pathway of involvement here that we are stimulating, not only in terms of the decision-making processes in this council, but also in leadership roles more generally in the community. And that's really what this is about young people having that opportunity to have their voice, to engage directly with us, to raise questions, to put hard questions to us, to make submissions, whatever it might be. And it's up to us as councillors and also council officers to not only be respectful and inclusive, but actually be responsive to the challenges that young people and students send our way. So this is a fantastic initiative. Very much looking forward to the 2 meetings we have scheduled.
10 seconds.
The first one on the 20th of May. And I say, let's bring it on.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? No, there being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.8, delivered meals service contract. Do I have a mover?
I'm happy to move that.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. And a seconder? Councillor Messina, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, this item is in relation to our delivered meal services, and it's in regards to extending our contract with the community kitchen, the regional food kitchen, for a further 2 years, and also extending it with the option of extending it even further. We've had a relationship with the community kitchen for quite some time, and we're actually one of the founding bodies in relation to the community kitchen. So what we're doing as part of this report is it's basically a contractual arrangement to extend the contract because the contract's about to expire soon. Just some background in relation to the service. As part of our community home support program, which we currently receive bulk funding for, and it's great to see that the federal government's extended our funding to 2022, and that vulnerable residents in our city have access to home-delivered meals. The meals are cooked by this organisation where we contract the meals from, and they're delivered by our staff. And also that the meals are also available to young people on community care program for young people, so the meals are also accessible for them. The contract will be for about $390,000, and there's and we have about 170 clients that receive meals during the year. Look, it's had a bit of a checkered history. In order to be really honest about this, in the past, people were not very happy with the quality of the meals. Not so much the quality, because It was more sort of the feel, the look, and the of the meals. But I believe that the meals have improved over the years. There's a greater choice of meals. We've got to be mindful that the meals are provided from a nutritional perspective, so that to ensure that people are not able to get out and about, that the meals that they do have access to provide for all their nutritional needs. And also there's been a concerted effort by the provider to increase the choice, make it culturally appropriate, and so that it actually appeals to a cross-section of people in our community. So the contract will, if councillors pass the motion tonight, the contract will continue for a couple of years, and so that there won't be any interruption in the service for our elderly citizens and those young people in need of getting home meals delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Messina.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I work in the aged care industry, and most of my clients will talk about the fact that they're unable to cook for themselves. And what this program does is gives them a choice of what meal they want, how often they want it during the day, or only if one's enough. But what it does is gives them something that's ready-made. It's in the freezer, it gets delivered, but it also gives them access to somebody from council. That is probably their only interaction for the day. It puts a smile on their face, but it gives them that connection to council services, connection to the community, and connection to somebody outside their four walls. So not only does it give them a nutritional meal, it gives them that space of a little bit of self-esteem, if that's what they're looking for. So I'm happy to extend this, and I want to also echo the sentiments and everything that Councillor Greco has said, and what a wonderful, wonderful program we do provide for our community. So thank you. Happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.9.
Happy to move.
And can I ask what you're moving, because we need some things filled in?
Yep. Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation, which will come up on screen, and I'll read it out. That Council enters into a contract with Advent Security Electronics Group Pty Limited for the provision of security services CT 201885 for 3-year fixed term with options for further periods up to a maximum of 4 years, bringing the total contract to 7 years and an estimated cumulative amount of $1,627,182.70. This amount includes GST and includes CPI, no CPI for initial term. The contract to commence on 1st of July 2019 and expire on the 30th of June 2026 if all options are exercised. 2, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to finalise and execute the contract documentation on behalf of Darebin Council. And 3, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to exercise options for extensions if and when required.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McCarthy, thank you. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So this has been a very extensive tender process that is choosing a security contractor for us for the next 7 years. And there's just one thing that I wanted to, apart from particularly commending all the officers that did such great work on this tender, I just wanted to point out too that there will be an apprenticeship as part of this, and that was something that the chosen provider offered. So what's going to happen is there's an apprenticeship scheme in place, so they'll be working with the Brotherhood of St Lawrence Cadetship Program, and they've got a minimum commitment of 1 full-time person for the Darebin Council contract. So just really wanted to commend that Council wanted that, and that the provider is able to provide that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor, and I just wanted to echo my support for not only the approach taken here, and so pleased to see an apprenticeship included as part of this contract, which is something which we set out and intended to see more of through our procurement process, but that's been able to be successfully structured in this proposal. I also just want to note that as part of this particular tender is one of a number of processes where we've collaborated with neighbouring councils, Northern Region councils, which dates back a couple of years now. And there's a real benefit for councils working collaboratively through these processes, because the services that we're talking about are consistent services that can be delivered across a range of councils. So why not actually combine our forces and leverage a better price, not only for our residents and our organisations, but also potentially a better outcome. As we've seen, by able to operate at scale, we're able to see these flow-on benefits, including the employment opportunity through an apprenticeship as part of the service. So thank you to the officers, and thank you to the collaborative work of all the councils involved in this process, because if we can see more of that, then we can see obviously not only cost savings, but also local benefits being delivered through these processes. I'll end it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to 8.10 on the agenda.
Mayor, I'll move that with inserting some words.
Great. So moved by Councillor McCarthy, and we'll just make sure that we get that.
Read out
So,
the words. Yep. So this is item 10, which is the multi-sport stadium design consultant services to Brand Architects for the contract sum of $1,164,944, including GST. Under point 2, to insert the number of $232,988.80, including GST, being approximately 20% of the contract amount.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Is there a seconder? Councillor Newton, thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. It's always a pleasure when we adopt these contracts in the public chamber, because for most of my time on council, and only until this term, these things were always dealt with in camera, and as we identified, unnecessarily so. We've found a way to bring these sorts of contracts into the chamber, into the open, and of course it is the critical point of appointing the preferred provider, which is the item that we make the final decision on, as we are this evening. Obviously the multi-sport stadium is a project that is a significant and priority project identified in our council plan. Councillors would be well aware of the project. We will obviously have a number of pieces of approval through tenders and processes. This is one of those in terms of approving a designer for the venue, and of course the design service itself includes a range of services, including architectural, engineering, both structural, civic, traffic services, and environmental and sustainable design services. So the report speaks for itself. The process has obviously been a rigorous one, and the outcome, I think, is really positive in terms of delivering that service. I would also just note that in relation to the multi-sport stadium project, this, as I mentioned before, is a key project identified in our council plan. It is going to take time for us to get all the various pieces. We need to step through those processes of design before we can move to build. So whilst I think we'd all love to see it happen overnight, we need to step through those processes to get the best possible outcome. And of course, the other thing that I think councillors would be aware is that of a project of this scale, there is a huge job dividend which will flow from this, including, in this case, a total of 101.4 direct jobs, 82 on-site construction jobs, 5.6 professional jobs in design, in which case this is one of those, and of course project management, and 13.8 industrial jobs in materials and equipment supply. So when we talk about the big projects that we have in this city, there is generally a jobs dividend, and we seek to try to deliver that as a local dividend. And in this case, there is work being created through this project that has obviously local benefits. So this is a terrific outcome, but of course the larger project itself delivers a huge jobs dividend in our local area.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Messina, did you have a question?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, is a 20% contingency normal for a contract of this size, please?
Thank you. I'll ask Darren.
Through you,
Martin, thank
Mayor
you.
Rennie, that's appropriate for this stage of design. That contingency can be reduced as the design process goes on.
Thank you, Mr Martin. Councillor Newton, you seconded, so over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So just very briefly, really happy to see this going ahead with the design. And I believe we're about 20 days out from the federal elections. So if any federal candidates are listening, we'd be very happy to receive any help. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers? No. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Councillors, that brings us to the end of consideration of reports. So we'll move now into consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. There is one at 9.1 on the agenda.
Happy to move.
Moved by Councillor Newton
Thanks.
and seconded by Councillor Amir. I think I've got Councillor Amir, I called your name, so go with that. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Firstly,
I might just also, apologies for not saying this beforehand, draw councillors' attention to the fact that we did have one written submission
yes.
on this matter, which was provided on the desk of all councillors. Thank you, Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Firstly, I'd like to thank the people that did submit this petition. This has been one that has actually been, I think, quite a tricky decision for quite a lot of us about what to do with this site. Because this was an artwork that came about before many of us were on council. And obviously we are a council that really cares about the amenity of people and also the amenity of fauna in our area. So the issue is that there's an artwork that has some sounds and also some lights. And the question was whether that artwork affects the fauna. So we got a report back where, it's a pretty busy area. And so it was hard to find out, but they did do what was possible in terms of finding out if fauna was affected. And what was found was that with the Merry Creek quite close by, that's where the fauna tends to go. And there wasn't any clear indication that the art installation itself means that there's less fauna in the area. So because of that, for me, I do think that we need to continue on with this artwork. But I think the lesson here is that perhaps to be doing a fauna assessment at the time when we are doing any artworks like this going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir.
This is a challenging situation and one that I've thought about and talked to a few people about over the last couple of weeks. I think what it came down to for me is we need to differentiate between the question of whether this was something that should have been installed in the first place and whether or not we should decommission it now. So it's possible that maybe this was not the right art installation for this place at this time. I absolutely agree with the comments made by Carolyn Lunt, who has been very active on this issue, that we don't know the impact of the installation on the fauna in the area. But that said, I will note that it is a very busy area. It's very loud, it's very bright. They're not native trees. So I guess from the information we have, it does seem like the impact would not be as great as it might be in some other area. And this was something where I could put my zoology degree to use, and thinking about this site, the trees are not likely to be of great value for foraging or habitat for for birds and bats. And the possums we get in this area tend to be highly adapted to urbanised environments. The common brush-tail possums and ring-tail possums, where they can live pretty much anywhere. So I think they'll be okay. The other question for me was about the public value of art, and it is true that there are a group of people in this area who do very strongly oppose the installation, but I'd say that there'd also be hundreds or even thousands of people who either really like the installation or they see it sometimes and think, oh, that's nice, or maybe they're walking home after a night out on High Street and it just makes their night a little bit better. And we're not going to hear from those people. We're not going to ever know how many they are, but that's the value of public art that is important too.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to item 10.1 on the agenda. So we're now in notices of motion. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'll move this motion.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor Greco.
Okay, thank you. Look, councillors, why I'm bringing this motion to the attention of council is that at the moment the Victorian Minister for Planning has approved, as we know, 5 principles in relation to the future planning controls of Preston Market site. The first principle talks about a market for the site. It doesn't actually make reference to the market, which is the existing Preston Market. When I went through the documents of our guiding principles, the language in our guiding principles is to my reading of them, they are a bit vague because they refer to the market, and so it's not absolutely clear whether we as a council are saying in our written documentation whether we are supporting the preservation and the improvement of the existing market and that the planning controls get developed within that framework. Now, what the Minister for Planning, as a result of the consultations that were conducted in the community through the reference group, has decided on the principle of a market. Now, I don't want to be too literal, but a market to me is not the market. And I think that, as all the councillors here would agree with, that we all got onto council on the basis that we wanted to protect the Preston Market. Now, that doesn't mean that the Preston Market remains as it is. Obviously, we want to preserve the market. We want to preserve its intangible spirit and assets, which comes with the site. But also we want to improve the market. It's not like the argument that, we're going to leave it as it is. No, the idea is that we would preserve the market and improve it. So I was putting this motion forward that we will put this position back to the Minister before pen hits the paper in terms of developing the planning controls, so that the planning controls are developed from the perspective of preserving the existing market. Also, I'll point out that the community reference group, that very point, there was a division in the community reference group about preserving the market as against preserving a market. And I must say, I was at the meetings myself, is that the more representative bodies at the community reference group meetings were people that were representing organisations with large membership or representing large groups of people. The ones that were promoting the A market approach were actually individual members of the community. So I ask councillors to think about this so that we're more consistent, we're more coherent, and that we preserve the market.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
It's pretty straightforward. I guess it's all we're trying to do is making sure that we actually dot the I's and cross the T's, that we want to specify which market we're talking about, not just any food market, that it's the Preston Market.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I can't support this, and whilst I appreciate Councillor Greco's consistency and persistence in relation to seeking to influence the wording that the Minister has adopted in relation to this, I think we need to be honest and realistic about where the points of influence and the strongest points of influence actually are. The reference that is in the Minister's words is a planning reference. It's a reference that is a technical reference. I don't think anyone's under any aspersions about what we're referring to when we talk about Preston Market. The community's voice has been very clear. I think it's problematic when we start to talk about the future of Preston Market all necessarily having to be exactly the same physical footprint, when in fact the footprint could be expanded. The footprint could be better located in relation to safer access to the train station, safer access to High Street, whatever it might be. So I think we run the risk with this proposal that we end up confusing things further by not allowing for those improvements to both safety, accessibility and potential expansion of the size of Preston Market, the fresh food market that Councillor Greco so passionately refers to. I don't want to limit the future scope of Preston Market in terms of what it can be, and And I'm concerned that we are delving into minutiae that run the risk of actually confusing our message and our advocacy, which has been strong and consistent and persistent over the last couple of years. So I can't support it, despite the fact that I appreciate Councillor Greco's efforts regularly to bring these motions to the chamber. Some I've supported, but this one I can't, because it's a planning term that's been used, and I think we all know what we're referring to in terms of Preston
10
Market,
seconds.
which is a thriving fresh food market, ideally with all the same store holders and more, and that's what we're fighting for.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Just briefly, so I think that all councils want to protect Preston Market. Certainly in my 3 years on council, we have been talking about the whole time. We've been through the process with the VPA. I did an interview again last week, a phone interview about the significance of the market. But for me, in the last 3 years, what I've also found through the process is thinking about what the Preston Market could be, as well as just what it is now. And for me, when we know that the level crossing removal is going to be happening there, when we know that we can think about things like nighttime markets, when there will be people living there in the apartments in the future, to limit it to the existing Preston Market and to say specifically preserving and improving the existing Preston Market, for me that limits the scope of what's possible. And I think that we should think bigger than that. For me, I don't think we should be limited to the current footprint or just what's there now. And I think we need to think about the possibilities, not just the current state of the market.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there further speakers? Councillor Amir.
Just briefly, as points have been covered by other councillors, there's 2 points I wanted to make. One, so I'll be speaking against the motion. One is that, so we're currently involved in a process with the VPA, and as Councillor Newton has mentioned, also Council is undertaking its own process, which is a very broad and long and ongoing process. And I understand the frustration of wanting to be, I guess, seen to be doing things and advocating, but it is a very big, complicated project because it is a very big and complicated site with lots of divergent views. As Councillor Greco mentioned, even the group itself was split. I think it would be true to say the community is also split. I don't think there is one view that is dominantly held by the community of wanting to keep the market as the current footprint compared to thinking about expansion, compared to thinking about relocation. And at such an important site, we really want to make sure that it can be as good as possible and incorporates the components that we talk about many times a week here in council around things like access to light and access to open space and community inclusion and affordable housing. And there's a lot that we as a council want to do on the site. There's a lot that the community would be really keen to see. And I think the way to allow that to happen is to allow the space for those models and ideas to come back to us. And if what comes back after all these processes are complete is something that we feel threatens the integrity of the market structure, the market culture, the things that make the market we love, the market that we love, then that's the time to challenge it rather than throwing things in at the side when there's so many other big and more influential processes already in train.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there further speakers? Councillor Messina.
I have to talk with the motion. I'd like to discuss a few things. And the first thing is that we're not debating whether we love the market or not. We all know we love the market. For me, the footprint needs to stay alive. So I'm going to support Councillor Greco's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Greco, you have a right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'll just pick up on a couple of points. In terms of the footprint, maintaining the existing market is a way of guaranteeing that at least we secure the existing footprint. If we want to expand that footprint, so be it, that it be even better. But like that, if we talk about protecting the existing market, we ensure that the existing footprint, at least, or a sizable proportion of it, is protected and that it's not diminished by the language that's being used by the minister, it opens up actually diminishing the footprint of the market. The other thing, the other point that needs to be made is when we talk about the intangible value, the culture of the market, that comes with the site. And so if we leave it open that talking about a market, and where the market theoretically by a very aggressive developer could actually completely bulldoze the whole market and build a market on a corner of the site, and we will not even know what the size of that is, actually then takes away also that intangible value that's associated with the market. So what I am suggesting is that it's a way of ensuring and guaranteeing that we are preserving the market as we know it now, and that we build from that base on. And building from that base on could actually deliver us, at least it'll deliver us what we already know, and bring with it development into that site that will encompass a beautiful and existing intangible asset that we have there. The way it's worded at the moment is that it leaves it open both for the minister in terms of developing planning controls, and also it will leave it open to a future developer. And we've seen, and we know how aggressive developers can be on particular big sites like that, where they may erase any existence of the existing market and just have a little market or a series of shops in one corner of the site.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. That moves us to item 10.2 on the agenda. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I have an alternate. It's actually an alternate motion, which was prepared with the assistance of, here it is, by officers. But so I'll give councillors an opportunity to read it, so that I sent it around later this afternoon.
Can I just have a time to... I haven't read it, so I'm going to take time to read it. Thank you. So you've got a question, Councillor Amir? Yes, I'll allow the question before we get, and then you were...
Question as well.
Okay, so we've got two questions. Thank you.
Given that this is something we've discussed previously, I was wondering what work was already planned in this space as part of either this year's or next year's budget around investigation or action on water quality in Edwards Lake.
Thank you for that question. I'm just going to clarify whether I need a seconder before it's actually on the agenda, so you're happy to second. So it's been seconded by Councillor McCarthy, but I'll pass that question to Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. At this stage, there's sort of ongoing water quality management this year and proposed in the draft budget for next year. That does not take us any closer to answering a feasibility study question. There's no work proposed that would move towards a feasibility study.
Thank you. And Councillor McCarthy, did you have a question?
Look, I did have a question, and it's just some clarity around point 2, the environmental contribution funds. If we can just get a little bit more information about what that is, because I'm not familiar with that particular fund. If that is if that's the name of the fund, or
yes, Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So what I don't know the detail of the fund myself. I do know that the team have double-checked that, and that's the correct reflection of the state government's funding source related to Albert Park Lake.
thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to Councillor Greco as the mover of the motion.
I'm moving that motion. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, Councillor McCarthy has seconded it.
Look, the reason I'm moving this motion is that through the council budget process, we didn't approve $280,000 in relation to commissioning some reports that could tell us what we would need to do to improve the quality, water quality of the lake. So this is perhaps doing it in another way of actually asking or getting the state government to buy into the process of assessing not only assessing but the quality of the water quality of the lake, and seeing how we can actually move forward to improve the lake's use and improve the lake's water quality. And and why I put this motion, and pardon the pun, because at the moment we're treading water in relation to this particular lake. We're monitoring it, making sure that it doesn't become too toxic. But I just see it's a huge waste in a sense that we have this beautiful water reserve, but we're not able to bring it back to its former glory. And just to remind councillors, once the lake, people were swimming in the lake. People were conducting water sports in the lake. Schools used to have swimming competitions in the lake. At the moment, you would dare to dip your toe in the lake because you probably end up with 4 toes left when you pull your foot out. And so here it's a thing about trying to see how we can move it forward and try to get the state government to buy into the process. Now, some people may say that's wishful thinking, but I'm not sure if it is wishful thinking because our lake is only second to Albert Park Lake. And my research has shown that Albert Park Lake is not funded just by the local council. It's actually funded by a state government fund. When we pay our water rates, a certain amount of those water rates go towards funding Albert Park Lake. So we as residents in Darebin are indirectly supporting Albert Park Lake, but no one is supporting us. And because the lake is, and I acknowledge it would be a massive expense to try and remedy the issues at the lake. And also because the lake has a regional implications in terms of the downstream of water that comes to the lake already in a contaminated. So it's not something that council just can fix. It needs to work with other stakeholders to make something like this, to realise the future of it. So that's why the appeal is being made to the state government to see how we can buy them into the process, at least to do a feasibility study, and at least that we can map out what would be the course of action that we would need to take in the next 5 to 10 years to actually improve the water quality of the lake. And the final point I would make is that whilst the lake has deteriorated over the years, we know that our environmental standards have become more and more stringent over these years. And to me, it's a bit of an irony in the sense where we've got something that's been deteriorating from an environmental perspective whilst our standards have been improving. And I don't think as a council with very strong Greek credentials that we should be silent on this.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to Councillor Greco for changing the motion as it now reads, striking out point 3, because in its previous form I don't think I could have supported it, but I certainly can support this. And I think Councillor Greco is right to acknowledge that if we were in a situation where there was the sufficient both government and potentially other investment, so state government investment and potentially even federal government investment in regenerating Edwards Lake, it's going to require a whole lot of action upstream. And I think we just need to remember it was only a couple of years ago that we had the fish deaths in Edwards Lake, which were the result of a pollution incident from industrial activity further upstream. We do not control the water that flows into Edwards Lake. We do not have control over that. And so the biggest indicator of the health of that lake is actually under the control of both Melbourne Water and the Environmental Protection Authority. We only have to look at the pollution incidents in recent years, including in Edwards Lake, to know that it is a precarious situation with some of the industrial activity that I would say in some cases is not as well regulated as it should be, and certainly the water quality issues that we've identified that also impact, of course, on the nearby Mary Creek and Edgars Creek as well. So we need to acknowledge the reality of the situation, which is that all the power in relation to the health of Edwards Lake sits in the hands of the state government as both the body that controls the water flows and, of course, regulates environmental pollution further upstream. If we don't acknowledge that, we're kidding ourselves. As a report that Council had back in 2013 has shown, it would cost millions of dollars to regenerate the lake to its former glory. And we know that because Councillor Greco and I were on council at the time, and we investigated and asked that question at the time.
10 seconds.
So I'm open to finding out what the state government will do. I'm open to federal members coming out and making commitments of this nature, and I'm happy to proceed in this direction.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I've just got 2 small spelling amendments. So in the title, it should be Edwards with an E, and I would probably say just Edwards Lake rather than Edwards Park Lake. And also 3, it should be Edwards with an E in the second line, and I don't think the word park is necessary. That's all.
Councillor Greco, I'll treat those as amendments and you're comfortable with them, Councillor McCarthy, so we'll correct those. Thank you.
That's all. Thanks.
Are there further speakers? Councillor Messina.
I just want to echo the words of Councillor Greco and Councillor McCarthy. When I speak to the community, the three things that they talk to me about is Preston Market, obviously, Reservoir Station and Edwards Park Lake. I think we talk about the asset of Preston Market, and it's something that we don't own, unfortunately, but Edwards Park Lake is something that we can change, and I think it is an underutilised asset that needs much improvement. Water quality is only one of the aspects, and I know we're changing the track. I remember as a schoolgirl going down to Edwards Park Lake as an excursion. Yes, I'm that old, but I think it's an underutilised asset and we need to see and explore what we can do with it. So I'm going to be supporting Councillor Greco's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? Councillor Williams.
Edwards Park Lake was actually the first spot that became very popular as a swimming destination for locals back in 1919. Now, we're talking over 70 years ago. It's been drained 8 times since its time of opening, and it's actually a huge part of Reservoir, and it's a big part of Darebin. You go from one end of Darebin that has the exclusive golf course, and then you go down to the other end when we have this beautiful lake that we celebrate year after year, where we have communities that come together and have picnics, barbecues, the playground. But most of all, council use it as not only for the little athletics, but we use it for the kite festival. The one thing we don't use is the water. When we could go back and actually do more in this area and we could utilise the whole of Edwards Lake, we're only using part of it now. I think it's the way I look at it, it can't be any different to the way the Yarra River is. You say water flows into it from other areas. Well, doesn't the Yarra River does the same? And yet we have Moomba Festival there. We have the Birdman Rally. We have water sports there. We have rowing. We have water skiing. How is that any different to Edwards Park Lake? We need to look for the future and we need to start doing things very differently. I think it's as... thank you for our Councillor Greco, who has been tirelessly fighting, and also Councillor Lawrence, in trying to get this lake up and running again, because I think it's paramount and I think it's an asset that we could do a lot more, including its boathouse, that I think it's lacking in, where we could have restaurants that
10 seconds.
A lot of other areas have, where they utilise that water.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried.
Can it be noted?
It will ask that it's been noted as unanimous. Thank you. That brings us to item 11 on the agenda, reports of standing committees. There are none. So item 12, records of assemblies of councillors. Moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Amir. All those in favour? That's carried. That brings us to item 13.
Happy to move.
So that was moved by Councillor Messina and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Item 14, consideration of reports considered confidential. I've got a motion from Councillor Messina that we move into camera, seconded by Councillor Amir. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. To members of the gallery, we've now come to a part of the agenda which is confidential. I'd ask you to step out of the meeting for this item. Thank you.